information that we are providing is valuable enough, and it goes back to that first point that I made, and it is actually factored into decision making. Again, my experience, a bit of a catch-22, because sometimes when you've come up with a recommendation and that recommendation ends up being being the right one for the organization, you tend to get buy-in, right? So people say, wow, okay, actually we should involve risk more because they spotted this, and actually now we've made a better decision. But sometimes even getting that opportunity is tough, right? So how do we actually do better at this to provide information that's actually going to be embedded into strategic decision making? Because I think that is not really happening very much in my experience anyway. The risk compliance audit gray area. It is no secret that, of course, these areas are very closely linked. I mean, that's for sure. But I think, often I've worked in organizations where people just don't understand the difference between these functions. It's completely fine if they sit together, if they sit under one function, but they do have different objectives. I think sometimes it just gets bundled into one as the annoying people that come and ask you questions, and we don't really differentiate them enough to be able to provide that value. Okay, and moving on. And so then finally I come to, and I don't know if any of this has been covered today, Lauren, but the framework and tools, some of the things that we use can often be a little ineffective. They don't really communicate to boards what they need to know. And I put 2-minute rule there because that's kind of my own personal mantra when I go into a meeting or risk committee or board risk committee. If I haven't convinced those stakeholders in 2 minutes what I'm trying to convey, I probably lost them and lost the attention. So it's really important to have that executive summary, to be succinct with it, but to have those frameworks and tools to be able to support you in doing that. And I think so many of them, are just outdated, and they don't really serve the purpose. So that's really my take on where things are going wrong right now. I'll just move on to the next slide. So changing risk, why now? I mean, it could be, you could take 2020 as a milestone, but why now? For a few reasons. I think because there's so much momentum, right, about changing risk, and so many organizations are talking about it, but also we live, I mean, if you just think about the last 6 months in the political environment, whether you live in the US or UK or Asia, so much. And I think that, risk management is very much, it's got to be very present. So I think we are really at that cusp of change, and if we don't embrace it now, I think we almost would be missing an opportunity or missing the trick to really prove ourselves in our organizations that we can actually be part of that, the strategic decision making, which clearly is going to change given today's volatile times. I think, just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think companies, know that risk functions exist. They have for a while now, but they really need to understand how it's a game changer. What are they actually going to get from their risk functions? Risk managers, I think, are probably asking where they really fit in their organizations, how they can grow and what the future holds. Because let's face it, none of us really want to be doing risk matrices for the rest of our lives. I mean, where are we really going with this? And what does that future look like? And I just sort of reiterate that again, like I said, macroeconomic factors, we live in this really volatile world. So what is really the future of risk management, in my opinion? It's not an afterthought. It is not a compliance-driven process. Again, I won't name organizations, but I have worked at places where I think, the entire focus of risk management is just so you can write an annual report at the end of the year and say, yep, we did this, and, that's fine. So definitely not that, because it would make a very boring job. And like I said, not an afterthought. It's got to be very present. Innovation within the profession, good to know that there was a lot of chat about data, because I guess that's a hot topic, and something that everyone is trying to incorporate into their risk management spectrum. But I do think we need more innovation. Again, I work for a very fast moving, dynamic company. So again, for those of you who are not familiar with Lazada. It's actually owned by Alibaba. So you can just imagine just the pace of change is quite phenomenal. And risk management really needs to support that change and be part of that change of this organization. So, for example, we see so many different scams every day, right, by buyers and sellers. So, for example, if you were to buy an iPhone and, the number of, like I said, scams you'll see. So you have to be completely on top of that. That takes innovation. That takes being very proactive. And that takes, like I said, moving out of this traditional framework and tools, because those tools are not going to capture the ever-changing landscape that we work in. So then I sort of said about the competency requirements, because I do find that's an issue. So even within the teams that I've worked with before, very different backgrounds, very varying levels of skills and competencies. And it would just be nice to know that we as risk managers are equipped with the right skills to be able to deliver our jobs in the right way. When I presented these slides before, I have used the example of, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, you've got certain qualifications, you've got to go through, sort of the robust training that you do need to. As risk managers, sometimes I feel like people fall into it and then develop skills along the way, but I think we need to definitely get better at defining what those skills are. And then really looking at strategic issues, so reputation, brand, shareholder value. I'll sort of quote an example from my previous organization, AirAsia, back in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. There was unfortunately a plane crash, and that was in Indonesia. But actually, the way that it was dealt with ended up being a positive for AirAsia. And that same year, which was a very catastrophic year for Malaysia, the Malaysian Airlines plane had also gone missing and then also fell out of the sky. So the way that comparison was obviously made, and the way AirAsia handled it was very, very positive, because the families, of course, at that point, the plane has crashed. You have to deal with the crisis with the families and be able to understand how best to address it. And it was handled really, really well. So I think, risk management being part of that and being, an essential part of managing reputation, managing brand, managing shareholder value is so, so important. I've seen real life examples of this, and I think, it's not to be underestimated. It's huge. Even for the organization that I work in at the moment, the moment something goes wrong, it's all over social media, and things can go viral very, very quickly. So I think risk management has got to have a really, really strong hold on these factors. Of course, using data, I probably won't go into this too much given you've had a whole afternoon on data, but again, it's something that I have used in my previous organizations and continue to use now to spot trends, to really understand what consumers are looking for, and how it is we can actually use risk management to provide a seamless service, but at the same time mitigate any risks that we might be facing as an organization. And so the clear direction, right? And again, this goes back to my first point, I think, about every company being unique. And I think it's really important to have that, whether it's a 2-minute conversation with your CEO or board, to ask exactly, what is it that you want, right? What do you want from risk management? Do you want a 5x5 matrix? Do you want a dashboard? Do you want data? Do you want qualitative analysis? There's so many options. I think sometimes we get a little bit lost with trying to deliver everything all at once. And I think we need to be a little bit more focused as to what it is each company wants. And they will be very, very different based on the sector that you're in, the organization, the leadership, and it's really, really important, like I said, to have that conversation. And I think this will propel that change if we start having clearer direction. So where do we begin? This is my last slide. So this is what I like to call my 5R model. And it sort of just summarizes everything that I've spoken about. So relevance to the organization, but also to risk management as a community. That's really important. Responsiveness. As I said, if I just take the organization that I work with right now, if something were to actually happen in any given day, and it goes viral on social media, as a risk manager, I have to be incredibly responsive before it actually blows up to be a massive issue that is hard to contain. So I think that responsiveness element is really important, but also responsiveness to change, because companies do change and will change, and you've got to sort of go with it and really be part of that process. Resilience, because it is not easy being a risk manager, and I think, you know, sometimes we do question, like I said, where we sit in organizations, and to have that resilience just to sort of know your agenda, know what you want to deliver, and keep sort of moving forward is really important. Recognition. This is something I think we don't do enough of, because when we do make recommendations, or we do provide valuable input, we have to sell it, because this is the only way risk managers are actually going to get noticed within organizations, or even within the risk community. So I would say it's really important to go for that recognition, be a little shameless, and go for it. And this, I think, is, you know, is it helps not just risk managers as individuals, but it helps where you sit within the organization as well, if you just sort of, you know, become a bit visible. And then just the last point is really about reinforcement. So when I say, you know, going back, the you know, risk management needs to change, it does, but I'm not saying that everything needs to be reinvented, or, you know, so take those useful tools, reinforce them, roll them out, but, you know, do it in a smarter way. We are, you know, approaching 2020, so I think, you know, a new decade is upon us, and it's time to actually, you know, roll with the times. But not completely change it, like I said. So take the good stuff, reinvent it, and then deliver it, with more sophistication, perhaps. And finally, I will end with a quote that is not mine, but it says, "Change is one of the best things about our reality. It means better things are possible and new things are on the horizon. Change is also one of the most difficult things about our reality, because our minds are inclined towards things we know." And I think it's so true. Change is hard, and I think it's great that we have this community that you know, is passionate about change. So we're not really in this alone. So that's my presentation. I think I stuck to time, Lauren. So any questions or feedback? Please go ahead.
Yeah, there are. A couple have come through. They've come through on the chat thing. So if anyone who wants to ask a question, there's an actual Q&A bit to the site. But I will ask the questions come through. Suchitra, what do you think the expectation of management is for the risk management role? I'm guessing this is sort of going forward from now. Where do you think managers and their expectations from management will go from here?
From here, I think there are probably two things. I mean, probably two parts to that. One of them is definitely, and you know, I don't want to use it. It's almost going to become a cliched word of data, but it is true, because it's only through data that, in a way, management. It's you know, it's a way to convince them, right? Because no one can actually fight the data when you've got the facts in front of you. So I think they are going to want to see more proactive risk management in terms of showing data, and what that's doing in terms of trends. And the other thing is really getting down to the detail of strategy. I mean, I'm sometimes stunned by the number of strategy conversations that happen within organizations, and risk management is nowhere to be seen. They don't even get a copy of the minutes after, right? So I think, you know, a progressive management team will absolutely want to involve risk managers more, you know, more in those conversations. But it also takes homework on the part of the risk managers, because you can't go to one of these conversations and not have any input. So do the homework, understand where your company is going, what the landscape is, and actually be prepared to challenge some of the strategies, because that's the role. And I think that is really what, from my perspective, management are looking for, to earn a seat at the table, really.
We've had another question which actually has come up several times today, funnily enough, which is, how can we convince other departments to share data with risk management? What's your tips on this one?
Good. That's a really good good question, and I'd love to hear how other people do it. But personally, I've always gone with, you know, a use case, right? So find, you know, sometimes within the organizations that I've worked in, I've almost spent the first 2 to 3 months just building up alliances, because there'll always be some people who, you know, will be a bit more open to the idea and the concept and the workings of risk management, others who just may be a bit more skeptical. Find the people that are going to be open to it, use some of the data as a use case, show what it can actually do, and then present that to a wider audience to say, you know, we're not trying to sort of take your data and, you know, sort of to use it for our advantage. What we're really trying to do is help the organization, but you need to actually demonstrate an example of how you've done that. So find the people that are going to be on your side, get them to share some data, and then use that as an example. That's the way I've done it.
Perfect. We've actually run out of time at this end, but I will say that if anyone wants to come back to you, they can find you on LinkedIn,
yeah,
or via Lazada, I'm sure, as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of your ideas with everyone, Suchitra. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Lauren. I hope you have a good day ahead.
Thank you. So that's it from Asia Pacific, but my co-editor Kim will be taking over from here and picking up the next session, which begins in about half an hour. So I will leave you there and leave you in Kim's capable hands. Thanks very much for joining us.